Hello, Mags here again. I thought we'd have a play today with some rusting powder, PaperArtsy rusting powder. Comes in this little bottle. I absolutely love the stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. I haven't actually opened this bottle yet because I tend to decant it into a larger container with a wider mouth so that then I can pour it back into the jar easily instead of into the little jar. But until this runs out, I won't pour that one in because I do get little bits of debris in there when I pour it back in, so I tend to keep that one just for working with. I've got some PVA glue, just normal PVA glue. I am also going to try using a Yoo-hoo glue stick. I haven't tried that yet, so that'll be an experiment. I've got a... let me see, which brush shall we use? A reasonable sized, fairly stiff brush. As I say, my rusting powder. I've also got some vinegar. This is just malt vinegar. I think I've got another one here and I think that's white vinegar. It doesn't really matter which vinegar you use. I'll have them both there. I've got a piece of paper to catch the rusting powder, so I can tip it back into the container. And what I thought we'd have a go at creating was some of these. They're what I call rusty frames. They're just distressed rusty paper frames. It's quite nice on the back. Some of them I've cut the centre out. Like this one, I cut it with a knife and cut the inside out. This one I didn't. This one I tore the edges, which I quite like the roughness of that. And those have both had the middles taken out. This one hasn't. This is how it ended up. So this is what we're aiming for. I've also got a rusty tin tray. I have several plastic, old baking trays that I use for rusting, and then you do build up a bit of rust on the tray and that all adds to the effect. But you can use a plastic tray that hasn't been used before and it will still work. What I've done on these two squares of paper, pieces of paper, I've just drawn roughly round a piece of grey board, because that is the size of my pages of my little board book that I might be using them in. So that'll be the size of the page of the board book, so my frame will need to fit within there. I've also got a bigger, this is actually a rectangle, not a square, because what I want to do is create a frame which will then sit on the top of this jelly print. This is a page out of a craft card journal, and I love this down the edge, and it's got random paint on it because it was from a jelly printing session, and I like the sort of texture and the haphazard look of it. But I thought I want one of these to sit on the top but be a lot bigger so that it covers more of the area. So that's the plan. The first lot of frames I did, I had an A4 sheet and I drew round my little square of grey board 4 times and did all 4. It was a bit unwieldy. It was a learning curve, and it will be easier using smaller pieces because then I'll be able to just paint, sprinkle on the rusting powder, and then I'll be able to just do one frame at a time and set them aside. I think it'll be much easier. So I'm just going to do these 2 frames to show you. I think we'll do the small one with the glue stick and see how that works. So I'm going to just, this is a fairly new glue stick, so it's got a nice lot of glue, and I want to be inside my square more or less. because that's the size of my book. So I'm just going the width of the glue stick round. And then very quickly, while it is still wet glue, I'm going to get my rusting powder and sprinkle it over. You see what I mean about debris. In with my rusting powder, it's got all sorts of bits in it. So I'm covering all of my glue. Be absolutely certain. I've forgotten to put my mask on. I recommend wearing a mask because it's very fine powder is this, and it does get into the air. So I'll put my mask on hopefully before I do the next one. Right, so I've got a fairly rough frame there. Now I'm going to set that aside to dry completely. I don't know whether it'll work as good as the glue, which is the next one I'm going to show you, but we can only experiment. So we're going to tip this back into our jar. Set that aside for a minute. I should put the lid on and I don't knock it over. Right, the next one I'm going to do with PVA glue. I've got an old tile. This is a tile that I work on all the time. I've got an old tile here that I use a little bit like a palette. I'm just going to squidge out a bit of, it's got a thread there, PVA glue. Now, PVA glue is going a little bit lumpy. It needs a good shake up. Just move that aside a minute. I'll get our square. I'm going to load my brush up with a reasonable amount of glue and then sort of tap some of it off so I haven't got enormous amounts. And then I'm going to go within my square again and go like that. I don't mind if I go just outside my square. I want a sort of a random look, painterly random look. So I can see that it's all more or less covered. I think I'll just go across there. Right, and then again, very quickly, while it is still wet, I'll go back. I think I've covered just about all of it. And when you tip your rusting powder off, you can sort of move it around as well, so that you, if you think there's a bit that you haven't covered, this will be very difficult for you to see, but I'm just tapping it so that the rusting powder comes off, and then I tap it. That's it, now quite a lot comes off. And you can see I've got gaps. That's fine, you'll see later on it does actually add to the effect. Got a bit of a gap there, but that's fine, absolutely fine. I could just pick a bit of the rusting powder up and put it on there. It might be that I haven't got glue on there. Right, so we'll set that aside as well to dry. Right, we're back. Now I got overexcited and started brushing the excess powder off here before I turned the camera on. But you can see this is the glue stick one, and quite a lot of it has stuck, but not as much as I would hope. So I maybe wasn't quite quick enough at putting the powder on, but we'll see how it develops. I'm just using, this is an old pastry brush, that I use for messy work, just because it's quite coarse and it brushes the powder off quite easily. So this is the one with the PVA. Well, hopefully the PVA is dry, we'll see. And we're just going to brush off the excess. I'm trying to do it so you can see. Because you get excess powder that hasn't actually stuck, and you want that off, or as much as you can. I'm trying to do it so you can see. So you can see we've got brush marks, which is what we want because it adds to the distressed look. And you can see how much powder is coming off. It is a little bit of the debris. You just keep brushing until there's no excess powder anywhere, or hardly any anyway. Doesn't matter if there's a bit, because when you do the next step, it will actually add to the effect if there's a little bit left around. You can see here this is quite heavy, that's got a bit of a gap, but you can see the brush strokes, which is what I wanted. So again, I'll turn the camera off, get organised and do the next. Right, so we're back. I've got my larger frame and my smaller frame. I think actually I'll just cut that one down a little bit and then it'll fit better in the tray. There we are. They'll fit side by side then. I don't know how this one's going to go. I don't think it'll be as good as that, but we don't know. So then all I've got here is some white vinegar, and I'm just going to sprinkle it on. You want a reasonable amount so that most of your rusting powder is covered. You can, if you want, brush it about. Just try not to disturb the powder too much. You just gently move it about, and I tend to move it into the middle as well so that you've got vinegar everywhere, because then you get an added bonus in the middle of some nice rusty sort of areas in the middle. Don't forget to put your brushes straight into water, especially if they've got metal bits on. What I do then is I just tip my tray and my frames, basically to get rid of the excess vinegar. So I'm just going to put these somewhere, not quite sure where, over there for the minute, and I'll get rid of this vinegar back into the bottle and then leave them on this tray just to cure. Probably overnight is the best thing. This is where the vinegar goes everywhere. I don't mind if there's a little bit underneath, but if you tip away the excess, then it dries quicker. And it's the drying and the oxygen combined with the rusting powder and the vinegar that cause the reaction. It's the oxidization. I think that's the word. So there we are. We'll leave those overnight and come back and see what we've got. You can see what they look like at the moment. Right, so we're back, and these have been cooking overnight, and as you can probably see, we've got some gorgeous rust. The middle bit is lovely as well. I like this little couple of tiny little imperfections where there's no rust. This is lovely, but I will probably trim this off and just use it as a frame. But I might use that little bit or part of this in my scraps diary. This is the one where we use the PVA glue, and I must admit it's the best one. This one is okay, it's just not as defined. I like that effect better, but that's not that I'm not going to use this. I'll use it in something. But I'm not quite as keen on it as I was with this one. So I'll trim those up now. This one, I'm just going to just do it by eye. And as I said, that little bit will go in my scraps diary. And you can see, hopefully, where the rust doesn't go to the edge. I'm leaving that on. I could try and fussy cut round it, but it probably wouldn't be very successful. And some of you might like to just add paint and ink and things to those edges and leave it as it is. I actually tend to do this and trim them off. I'll get my archival ink pad. This is just jet black. And one of my makeup sponges. Well, a makeup sponge, not one that I use. And then I'm just going to darken the edges. I like this effect. I don't like the bright white so much. And you could do this with black, you could do it with vintage photo, you could do it with walnut stain. I tend to start with black to dull it down and then decide after that what I'm going to do. Hopefully this is in shot. I tend to move out of shot quite a bit. Yeah, that's better. But I think jet black tends to be a bit of a bluey black. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find my, here we are, black soot. This will probably be better. It's more of a black, less of a blue black. Yeah, that's definitely better. Yeah, that's better. I think we need a little bit of something else, so we'll just go to our sepia, which is a little bit towards the rusty tones. Let's see if we can find another sponge that hasn't got that colour on it. It's a reasonable amount. As you can see, it's sort of on towards the same tones. And then adding that over the top. Just brings the black into a dark sepia, which is vaguely rust-like. Trying to keep this in shot all the time. There we are, I think that's a little bit better. I'm just going to put a piece of white paper underneath and just go a little bit heavier. Yeah, I think that's better. And you can add colour where you think there's not enough, as well as on the edges. If you want to darken this down a bit, you can go on there a little bit. But I think that's enough. That's just right. Everything's falling down. Right. So I really like that little frame. I could add some stamping for more detail and things, but I think I will leave that as it is and then decide what I'm going to do. I've got this journal and I've got this page which was started. It's a part of it actually is a scan of one of my papers that I created using PaperArtsy fresco finish paints and walnut ink, and then I scanned it through and printed it, and it makes a good base to then add things to. So I've put some more PaperArtsy paint and things onto it. I'm thinking that's going to be part of the focal point with this as well, but I'm probably going to rip some of that away. My initial idea was to have it like that, but that's too regular. I'm going to rip the edges. Most of my background will be covered up, and I might add some more bits and pieces to that as well, some stamping, but I'll show you the page when it's finished.